Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast, LDS Discussions Edition. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It's Monday, January 2nd, 2025. And today we are doing a new LDS Discussions episode called The Book of Mormon as depicted in the CES Letter. Really quickly, let me just explain what the LDS Discussion series is. Forgive us, those of you who know what it is, but one of the reasons why we're continuing to add to the LDS Discussion series is because we're getting new viewers and listeners all the time. So for those who don't know the background, several years ago, a really brilliant Mormon, questioning Mormon named Mike, that's a pseudonym, started a website called LDS Discussions. He is a convert to the church. And after he converted to the church, married his Mormon wife and had kids, he learned a bunch of stuff about Mormon church truth claims that he really wished he had been told before he joined the church. And so he put up this website called LDS Discussions, where he dug deep into 30, 40 topics that people who cared about the truth would want to learn about. And we're talking, golden plates, Book of Mormon translation, Book of Abraham, the witnesses, all this stuff. Put it in a website called ldsdiscussions.com. And then we cut a deal with him to bring him on Mormon Stories and to do, a 40 or 50 episode series. And so that's what we did. It's basically me and Mike and Nemo and Julia and sometimes some special guests exploring LDS church truth claims, evidence-based and as objectively as we're able to be. It's definitely one of the most important things Mormon Stories has ever done. It's consistently listed as the most important influencer for people trying to figure out whether the Mormon Church's truth claims are true or not. You can find it at LDS Discussions playlist on YouTube. You can also find it as its own podcast series on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And the website's up there as well, ldsdiscussions.com. Mike himself is retired from podcasting for now. We won't tell you what he does as his day job now. It's top secret as far as our audience is concerned. But we are continuing to add to the library. And I'm super excited to have back with us today two of our participants in the LDS Discussion series. We have Nemo the Mormon. Hey, Nemo, welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have Julia, or Analyzing Mormonism, as she's known on TikTok and Instagram. Hey, Julia.
Hi.
And Julia, you prepared today's episode. Is that right?
I did. I did have Nemo's help. But yeah, I prepared the slides today. Yeah.
Okay. So y'all did it together. All right. Well, let me just give a tiny bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Julia.
Sure.
So just to give you all a little bit of background, Jeremy has been attacked kind of, as the Mormon Church does, instead of really addressing the substance of critics' arguments. What it often does is it attacks its viewers, its critics, and it attacks their motives, and it attacks their character, basically. And we're going to get into who Jeremy Runnells is and what the CES letter is very briefly. But before we do, I'm just going to address the attacks. So, whether it's Public Square Magazine, you can see this article, The True Origins of the CES Letter, where the headline is, was the CES letter an honest plea for answers rather than a sincere letter? It was a calculated deception to undermine faith. So again, they're going at Jeremy Runnells' motivations as intending to deceive. Here's another article from Meridian Magazine, which is a well-known apologetic argument, unveiling the truth, the real story behind the CES letter by Maureen Proctor. I won't even get into what I know about Maureen Proctor and, someone close to her passing away as a result of, from what I understand, the interactions between, Maureen and that loved one. It's not a pretty story. And then you could even have the website that was released and shared for quite some time. It was known as cesletters.com, where they were basically poaching or cyber squatting on the CES letter domain name. They grabbed cesletters.com and cesletters.org. And they were basically trying to cyber squat and to lure people to more apologetic sources, but borrowing on the CES letter domain name and on the name. Here's the YouTube channel as it used to be, CES letters, at YouTube. And then you can see, some of the types of videos that were released with BYU professor Stephen Harper, and there they have Richard Bushman and Brian Hales and sort of the normal Mormon apologetic casts of characters. As we understand it, a lawsuit was pursued for that sort of cyber squatting, specifically marketing around CES letter or CES letters. And we're happy to know that now at least CESletters.com, it redirects to the official Church of Jesus Christ.org website, which basically confirms that the Mormon Church was behind, this cyber squatting. But now CESletters.com redirects to the official Church of Jesus Christ.org website. And then CSletters.org redirects to studyandfaith.org, which I'm going to guess is also an official. It looks like it's an authorized experimental project out of BYU.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the backstory. And what I basically said is until y'all, Mormon Church, Mormon apologists, until you stop attacking Jeremy Runnells, and until you stop attacking his character, we're going to do our best to promote CES letter on Mormon Stories podcast. So that's the background of why I wanted to do this series. Now, Nemo and Julia, if y'all want to provide any quick reaction to my intro, and then we could jump right into the slides. Nemo,
points. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The first is, if you notice that the thumbnails that they're using on Study and Faith are also quite familiar to viewers of this channel.
Is that something that we could see on the slides?
Yeah. If you go back, there you go. Don't they look a little bit Mormon Stories-esque?
Okay.
A little bit big person on one side, the lovely faded image in the background, the way Gerardo does it.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, if people are drawn to that, maybe we'll do ours similar, and then we can get drawn that way. But the main thing I would point out is the reason for a series like this is because this thing has entered the Mormon zeitgeist that somehow the CES letter's been debunked. There's this thing just churning around the zeitgeist. People going, oh yeah, CES letter's been debunked. Don't need to worry about that. And actually, there are still important conversations that need to be had around the questions that the CES letter raises. So a series like this is important to kind of bring those back into the conversation, because what we can't have is these very legitimate concerns that are raised in the book or in the letter, them being just shorthanded away, going, oh no, that's been dealt with, because it hasn't.
Yeah, and I would just give the ending away at the beginning and say, far from being debunked, I think the CES letter has withstood intense mountainous scrutiny, and it stands stronger today than it ever has in terms of there not being credible. We could maybe find one or two out of hundreds of claims the CES letter makes. Maybe one or two if Jeremy's sort of been willing to retract or back away from a little bit, but overall, I think this CS letter has overwhelmingly stood the test of time, and that's why it's constantly listed as a main reason people change their minds about the LDS Church's truth claims. Julie, I want to give you a chance to respond as well, and we'll hand the presentation over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I just agree with Nemo. Like this, people say this has been debunked, but it hasn't. One thing that I found interesting is that a lot of members of the church, if a response exists, whether they've looked at it or not, they're like, oh, that's enough. Somebody has an answer for this. I don't need to check the answer. Like, I think an individual, is his name Bennett, who responded to the CES letter?
Jim Bennett?
Jim Bennett. So
Yeah.
I have family members, for example, they're like, oh, Jim Bennett wrote a response. That's great. That means the CS letter is bunked, even though they don't read it. And I've had the same thing happen with like Hugh Nibley responding to Fawn Brody, where even my father was like, oh, Hugh Nibley has a pamphlet that he responded to her book. No Man Knows My History. No, ma'am, that's not history. Were the two different articles. But I was like, oh, have you read Hugh Nibley's pamphlet? And he was like, no, I haven't read it, but just that it exists is enough for me. And I just think that's really interesting. So here we're going to present these things. Yeah, there you go. It's a horrible pamphlet. He's very, I don't know. I just don't like the way he handles Brody at all. But Anyway, so like what we're going to share today are things that like for the honest seeker, I suppose, like not just somebody who's going to be like, oh, this exists, it's fine. I don't know how to explain that, but like we're trying to bring up, these are legitimate questions and concerns that Jeremy Runnells has in the CES letter, and these are the reasons why. And this is why we're going to share some of his concerns and questions, and then some of how FAIR Mormon or other apologists have responded to those things. So that's how this is set up today.
So what I heard you say, Julia, is that if the Mormon Church simply creates any response, no matter how bad it is, there's a lot of believing faithful Mormons that will just simply say, "Oh, it's already been debunked," because there's a response, even if they haven't actually looked at, read, or thought about the response. Is that what you're saying?
In my experience, yes. Like even some of the things we'll look at, I'm like, I don't know how people are accepting this. I don't know. So that's my experience.
Okay.
I mean, the brain is, without getting too deep into it, the brain is an energy intense organ, right? And so if we can take shortcuts to just keep our position running the way it always has, then that's fine. So if your position that you want to keep is the church is true and I can remain active in it and all these sorts of things, then the easiest thing for your brain to do is to see that there's a response to the thing that might threaten that, and then just go, okay, well then there's a response, that's fine. It doesn't need to go any deeper than that, because that you can look at other things, then it can be involved in other tasks.
Right.
All right. Well, let's jump into it, Julia.
Yeah.
Shall we?
So the first thing I want to show is just Jeremy Runnells. This is the author of the CES letter, and you've interviewed him before on Mormon Stories. I think if anyone is doubting his sincerity in his writing of the CES letter, please go watch his episodes.
In fact, what I'm going to do, Julia, when we air this episode that we're recording right now, it's going to be after I rebroadcast the full Jeremy Runnells interview contiguously. Perfect. So if somebody's stumbling on this episode, they just need to go to the immediate previous one where you're going to see the entire Jeremy Runnells interview. And you can judge for yourself not only his sincerity and his story, but you can also, we discuss in depth many of the issues in the CES letter. And again, we don't want you ever to believe us on Mormon Stories or LDS Discussions. We want you to look at the evidence and decide for yourself, right?
Yeah. Okay. And that's one thing that I really try hard to do is like in all the slides that I want very specific footnotes. So if you guys have questions, just go straight to the footnotes, or I'll put these in the show notes as well. So don't trust us, go look for yourself.
Okay.
So I wanted to quote, there's a quote from Jeremy Runnells from the CES letter. Nemo, do you want to read that?
Sure. I believe that members and investigators deserve to have all the facts and information on the table, to be able to make a fully informed and balanced decision as to whether or not they want to commit their hearts, minds, time, talents, income, and lives to Mormonism. Anything less is an obstruction to the free agency of the individual.
Thank you. So one of the reasons why I wanted this on here is in the temple, this is like kind of like almost word for word, one of the covenants that you make in the temple is that you give your time, talents, all of your means, like your finances, I guess, and then like even your very lives if necessary to the church. And so like what Jeremy's saying is if you're going to commit all these things to the church, they owe it to you to have everything on the table. And so that's one of the things he's struggling with, is that a lot of these things they didn't have on the table. And then that's what he's presenting in the CES letter.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And so this, if we go to the next slide here, okay. So there are 16 sections of the CES letter, including other concerns, the conclusion, and sources and notes, and an epilogue. So today's topic is the Book of Mormon. And I don't know how thoroughly we want, because I picture this being like a series, like we go through each of the topics, like the next one will be Book of Mormon translation, and then the first vision, the Book of Abraham. And I don't know if we want to do, I guess, Nemo, you said other concerns have really good, like even the science section, they have things worth talking about.
Yep.
So like I picture this being a few weeks worth of a series.
A few months.
So
we're going to do, are you saying we're potentially going to do all the sections of the CES letter in sequence?
Well, that's up if conclusion or sources and notes and epilogue, if those are also episodes. So I'm not sure. So roughly
but at
16
least like
or
12
less.
Or at least 12, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so we're going to try and cover the Book of Mormon in one episode.
Yes, hopefully.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to share a few clips from the leaders first to kind of give a background about how important the Book of Mormon is and then what that means to the religion. And so this first one is Ezra Taft Benson.
My cousin.
Your cousin. And so I can't, John, if you'll share the screen, I don't know if I can.
Nemo, you're
share it.
looking weird at me. Why are you looking weird at me?
Because I mean that's news to me. I didn't know.
Yeah,
you were
so my
related.
grandma is Karma Benson Parkinson, and she was born and raised in, Franklin, Idaho, and she's cousins with Ezra Taft Benson, and my, great grandfather is Ezra T. Benson, who is like Ezra Taft Benson's father or grandfather. So I'm a Benson in my ancestry.
Wow.
Why are you all related? Just all the time.
Because we all came over from England, Nemo. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I'll just say, Ezra Taft Benson was former Secretary of Agriculture under Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was a prophet since the 50s and 60s, an apostle in the Mormon Church since the 50s and 60s, and very controversial. But when he became prophet, it was all about flood the earth with the Book of Mormon. That's what I remember about him. That's probably what you're going to show right now, is that clip, huh?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, should I play it?
Yeah, if that's
Okay, go for it.
This was the prophet Joseph Smith's statement. He testified that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion. A keystone is the central stone in an arch. It holds all the other stones in place, and if removed, the arch crumbles.
I mean, that's
Okay.
pretty clear, right?
Yeah, if the Book of Mormon is removed, the church crumbles, is what I think he's basically saying.
And I love that later on you get apologists will say things like, we don't know where people get this binary idea that the Book of Mormon is either true or it's not, or that if you can disprove the Book of Mormon, then the church falls apart. They were teaching it. They were literally teaching it.
Well, also, he says
dear.
it's the keystone of our religion, but there are at least hundreds, I think, of other religions who believe the Book of Mormon. So it can't be the keystone of one if so many have it. So I don't and believe that it's true. So that doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, because why aren't the other offshoots of the Mormon Church true?
Right. There has
If
to be
they
some
believe in the Book
other
of Mormon.
linchpin or some other thing.
Well, yeah, the linchpin would have to actually be, so the actual cornerstone or the actual keystone would have to be priesthood authority, because that's
Right.
what makes this branch of the Restorationist movement, the Latter-day Saint movement, correct. Is that Brigham Young was the one that was meant to be the next prophet, and that's why. Yeah.
Well,
That's the true keystone.
Well, even Joseph getting the priesthood is I'd go farther back than Brigham.
Well, no, but why this one's correct and not the others? It would have to be that Brigham's priesthood line is the correct priesthood line.
Right.
Yeah.
It's such a bold claim to say it's the most correct book ever on earth, given, what and we've covered on the LDS Discussion series so extensively all the problems with the Book of Mormon, which we'll get into today, but it's such a ridiculously bold. But that's what Joseph was. He was so bold. He would triple down whenever he was challenged. You know what I mean?
And so I did a video recently where I looked at translations of the Book of Mormon. And if you look at the church's list of different translations, it will say the Spanish edition was done. Here was the first translation, and then it was revised on these dates. And it'll say that about all the other languages. But for English, it won't say revised. It says translated, and then it says major editions. Even though we know there were massive revisions between the 1830 and the 1837 edition. Well,
Yeah. And I will say the Tanners, Sandra and Gerald Tanner, have also talked about the changes in the Book of Mormon. And there's been, what do they say? There was a 4,811 or something like that. I can't remember. It was like some specific number.
Big number.
But yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to the next video clip you have. This is one of my least favorite General Conference moments of all time. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, this is Jeffrey R. Holland. But I think you need to share the screen, John, and then I advance the slide.
No, go ahead.
Okay,
it's right there.
If anyone is foolish enough or misled enough to reject 531 pages of a heretofore unknown text teeming with literary and Semitic complexity, without honestly attempting to account for the origin of those pages somehow, especially without accounting for their powerful witness of Jesus Christ and the profound spiritual impact that witness has had on what is now tens of millions of readers, If that's the case, then such persons, elect or otherwise, have been deceived. And if they leave this church, they must do so by crawling over or under or around the Book of Mormon to make their exit.
So was
Wow.
he was talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, right?
I was thinking the same thing.
They
think it was Lord of the Rings.
testify of Jesus Christ, and they're quite long, and you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
like
have to
he's.
say that. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, he's talking about how the literary aspects of it, the complexities of it, all these things. Yeah, they have to account for that. But not only that, the good feelings that they have while they're reading it. So, like you were saying, Nemo, I was thinking like, oh, well, I feel good, or I felt good when I was reading Chronicles of Narnia, or like Lord of the Rings. Like, why is that more important? Why is the feelings that we have when we read it more important than these other aspects of the Book of Mormon?
Well, the church would say, if I'm trying to be objective, there's a difference between the spirit and your emotions. The Holy Ghost is profound spiritual inspiration versus the good feelings that fiction or nonfiction might generate. But no one's ever been able to actually explain to me how to know the difference, of course.
Right.
Yeah. I'll just say this was a particularly disappointing presentation to me because I had a lunch with Jeffrey R. Holland, a few months before he gave this presentation. It was my second lunch, I believe, with him, either first or second. But his point when we had lunch was that he really wanted liberals and progressives in the Mormon church, and he really wanted a big tent, even if he couldn't believe everything that the church, claimed, that they still wanted a big tent. And then when he gave this talk after assuring me that he wanted people like me in the church, it just made me feel like he was just telling me whatever he needed to tell me, but that he didn't mean it. Because if he meant it, he would never say something like this that just seems so tone deaf and off-putting to someone he claims he wants in the church. Now, maybe that's my assumptions, not actually how his brain works, but it was very disheartening, this talk he gave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
All right.
There's another talk from Holland that I want to share too. And I'm pretty sure Jeremy Runnells shares it in the CES letter, if I'm not mistaken, or on his website, I think. John, do you want to read this one?
Sure. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland once stated, quote, "Everything in the church, everything rises, falls on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. And by implication, the prophet Joseph Smith's account of how it came forth can be a little breathtaking. It sounds like a sudden death proposition to me. Either the Book of Mormon is what the prophet Joseph said it is, or this church and its founder are false, fraudulent, a deception from the first instance onward." Forgive me for the dramatization.
That's what he sounds like. He spoke to me at our mission and he was yelling at us. But yeah, so that was very black and white. If the Book of Mormon, like, it's a sudden death thing, it's either true or all these things like Joseph, he's a fraud, it's false, it's fraudulent, it's a deception from the very beginning. Like,
but we now know that it isn't what Joseph Smith said it was, or it's certainly not what the church told us that it was in terms of how it was translated, etc. Okay, the 2006 change to the Book of Mormon with the Doubleday edition, where they changed it from the principal ancestors to among the ancestors, right? That is changing what the Book of Mormon claims to be. It claims to be a record of some principal ancestors, but now it's claimed to be a record of just some of the ancestors. That change alone should then enact the sort of the situation, the binary that Jeffrey R. Holland laid out there. It's like, right, okay, it's now not what Joseph Smith claimed it to be. The church has admitted it's not what it claimed it to be in 2006. So, Jeffrey, do you really want us to then go on to the next part of that and say, right, then it's fraudulent from the first step onwards? Of course he doesn't. Of course the church don't want us to take that conclusion. And that's the danger with making these sorts of sudden death binaries.
right.
And I'll just add that we've covered on Mormon Stories for years that, people inside the church now, including people like Spencer Fluman, Richard Bushman, Terrell Givens, have stopped calling the Book of Mormon a translation and have started calling it a revelation, again, changing what Joseph Smith himself claimed it was. Like, the whole thing was Joseph had a seer stone or the Urim and Thummim, and he got gold plates, and he translated from Reformed Egyptian into English, and that was his power. And now the church is pivoting, saying, well, the plates weren't really in the room. He didn't really use the Urim and Thummim. He stuck a stone in a hat. And, he basically dictated, a revelation. And it's the same type of thing they're doing with the Book of Abraham. And so it's a great point you're making, Nemo. The Book of Mormon isn't even now being described as being what Joseph Smith claimed it was. So Holland and Ezra Taft Benson and others are just painting themselves into a corner.
Mm-hmm. And this is why people leave when they discover these things, because the church built these very fragile testimonies of it's either all or nothing. It's like, right, it's either exactly what it said it was or it's complete fraud. And so all people are left with when they discover these things is, oh, well, then
Fraud.
I guess it's a fraud.
Yeah.
And they're gone.
Yeah. This reminds me of the recent episode that you just rebroadcasted with John McClay, where he says, if the church had been honest from the beginning and talked about the stone in the hat or things like that, or polygamy, like he's like, I could have accepted that. But the fact that I feel like I've been deceived or lied to, that's what I can't accept. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure Jeremy Runnells feels the same way. Like if the church had just been honest from the very beginning about its origins and about all the treasure digging, all these things, like that's easier to swallow than the thought of, oh, you've been keeping this from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And not Spencer Fluman, but what's his
Patrick
name?
Mason.
No. He's the current church historian, or he's been doing a lot of firesides. Keith
Not
Erickson.
Harper.
Keith Erickson.
Gerald Halverson, is that?
No, Erickson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Keith Erickson came to the UK and he did a fireside, and someone pointed out, why is the church not talked about this stuff? And he said, there's a great deal of difficulty the church has had in disseminating this information, and it's only now with the information age that we're able to really kind of put this stuff out with the internet. And this person just came back and said, Community of Christ put all this out in the 60s. And it's true. Other denominations of the Latter-day Saint Restorationist movement have dealt with these parts of their history much earlier than the Brighamite group have.
For sure.
It's just worth mentioning.
Yeah, that is worth mentioning.
All right.
To the
Julia,
questions.
what's next?
Yeah, so this next slide, if you'll just...
oh, okay. Yeah.
So Jeremy Runnells lists 11 questions about the Book of Mormon, and so we're going to go through each of those. So the first one is, what are 1769 King James Version Bible errors doing in the Book of Mormon? In his book, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins, Grant Palmer states, Joseph's use of the KJV includes the modern errors which accumulate in the handwritten manuscripts in KJV over the centuries. And then Palmer lists examples. And so you can see here, so 3 Nephi chapter 12, verse 27 is similar to Matthew 5:27, by them of old time. And then 3 Nephi 12:30 is similar to Matthew 5:30, should be cast into hell. So he's just listing off different errors that are also present in the Book of Mormon that were also present in the Bible in this specific edition.
Now, Julia and Nemo, I don't know if y'all can help with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, someone who's viewing and listening right now who is raised Mormon, I don't even think they understand what you mean by errors, because you're just showing text, but they wouldn't know why to consider these words errors. Do y'all just want to help us understand what's erroneous about these examples? Because obviously we don't have time to dig into it, but just as a jumping off point for people who want to learn more. Nemo, were you going to answer?
I can do, unless Julia has an answer. But I think
you're good.
Essentially what this is translations, when they're done by, 17th and 18th century clergymen in the UK, when they are doing translations, they look at manuscripts and then they will try and best portray in English the words of the manuscript they received. Now, if things in the manuscripts, which the manuscripts were handwritten and preserved over time, if things in those manuscripts turned out to have been later editions or things that were added in by, copying, etc., then later translations will have spotted that and removed those and then try and get to a more pure meaning of the transcript that they were working from. So the 1769 edition of the King James Version of the Bible worked from manuscripts that had some of those things that had been included by scribes as they were being written over time. I believe that to my understanding, that's what's going on. But I think it's really important to mention that even if they were errors or not, if you'd want to be a King James Version purist and say those weren't errors, that's fine. The question still is, why are very specific examples from text in the 1769 edition of the King James Version of the Bible verbatim in the Book of Mormon? That's still a question that needs to be asked and answered.
And so y'all tell me if I'm getting this right. So basically, we know that Joseph Smith, the Bible that he had, was the 17, probably his family Bible was the 1769 King James version of the Bible. And then we know that the Book of Mormon just has extensive passages just kind of copied into it.
Yeah.
And it's not just that it appears to be plagiarizing the King James version of the Bible, it's plagiarizing the 1769 version of the King James Bible, which is the version of the Bible that we know Joseph Smith and his family had. Is that correct, y'all?
I believe so. There are photographs of the church release of the Smith family Bible. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if it's the 1769, but I think that's correct.
Even if it's a slightly later printing, I believe it contains the 1769 language. So it may have been printed in 1812 or whenever, but it has the 1769 update of the King James version of the Bible in it, is my understanding.
So I guess, and I'm assuming it doesn't have errors necessarily of previous or subsequent editions. So I guess viewers and listeners have to ask themselves, why would the errors of a particular version of the Bible that was one that Joseph probably had access to, if the Book of Mormon was a translation from Egyptian, Reformed Egyptian through the Urim and Thummim by the gift and power of God, why are errors from a particular version of the Bible that Joseph Smith would have had access to appearing in the Book of Mormon? All right, I think we covered that.
Well, yeah, just to really quickly tighten that up is to ask why, if God is giving Joseph Smith a language, either through a revelation, as some apologists are now saying it, or through a translation, he's either taking the words of 4th and 5th century Native Americans and then using the exact words of Oxford clergymen to translate those for some reason, or God's giving him the exact words of Oxford clergymen to write about the appearance of Jesus Christ giving the Sermon on the Mount, exactly the same words that were used by those clergymen to describe the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible.
Yeah. One example that's not an error specifically, I think, but my dad pointed out in one of the books with Paul, written by Paul in the New Testament, he says, "Oh, wretched man that I am." And that's a direct quote also from Nephi. So why is, I think also what you're asking is, why is a 1600 BC text showing up in this whatever version of the Bible, or even just post-Christ, even if Paul did say those things, why are those both showing up exactly the same way in these different texts?
You mean 600 BC, right? 600 BC?
Yeah, 600 BC. Did I say the wrong thing?
You might have said 1600, but 600.
Oh, sorry, 600 BC.
That's when Nephi would have been alive.
Yeah, so Nephi, when the very beginning. Yes, yeah.
And even if he said something in his language and that was then recorded in Reformed Egyptian that translates into English as roughly "a wretched man that I am," or some sort of exclamation of woe, why would Joseph Smith, or why would God give Joseph Smith the exact words that were translated from the Greek manuscript that reports the words of Paul? Why are those exactly the same?
Right.
I think is the nub of the question.
Yeah.
Because "oh, wretched man that I am" is what those scholars decided the Greek would best translate into English as. So it's a distinctive phrase that came from those scholars.
It just makes no sense that the King James, it doesn't make sense that the Book of Mormon is in King's English, or whatever the version of English it is. What version of English is that, Nemo?
I think some describe it as Jacobean English.
Yeah, just why would the Book of Mormon be in Jacobean English at all if if it was written by Nephites and Lamanites?
Why would it not have come out in the English of Joseph Smith's time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because why would Joseph Smith translate it into biblical
or into the language
verbiage
that these people in Oxford were using? Yeah.
Right.
Makes no sense. It's ridiculous on its face. All right,
Right.
Julia, what's the next slide? Because you've got FAIR Mormon's response.
Yeah. The next slide's FAIR Mormon's response. Do one of you guys want to read this one, Nemo?
Yeah, sure. As a corrective to the CES letter, the errors reported in the King James Bible are not unique to the 1769 version. 5 major editions of the King James Version were published in 1611, 1629, 1638, 1762, and 1769. Many minor additions and revisions have been made since the 1769 edition. The 1769 text is the standard text of most King James Bibles today, including that published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Only the 1611 and 1769 editions can be found online. The errors are contained in both editions. Readers can read the 1611 edition online and see for themselves. The more modern 1769 KJV used in Latter-day Saint scriptures can also be found online and checked. Given that the 1611 and 1769 editions contain the exact same translation errors, it's likely, though the author hasn't verified it yet, that the other major editions published between 1611 and 1769 contain the exact same errors, which in turn makes it more difficult for us to claim with certainty which edition of the King James Version, if any, Joseph Smith plagiarized from. So it's like, so we know he plagiarized from one, guys. We just don't know which one, all right?
But also,
Okay, so
How is that a response?
yeah.
So Nemo, can you summarize the argument FAIR Mormon's making there?
They're saying, look, the errors that Jeremy's talking about aren't just in the 1769 edition. They're in the 1611 and all the ones that came between that and the 1769. So, yeah,
Take
they
that.
appear in the Book of Mormon. We just don't know where he
Take
got them
that,
from.
Jeremy.
Yeah.
Previous versions of the Bible also had those errors. Take that, Jeremy.
So it actually just makes it more likely that Joseph would have had his hands on a copy of the Bible to take it from.
Right.
This doesn't address the core of the claim. They're just saying, actually, Jeremy, you're wrong because the errors aren't exclusive to 1769. All right? Fine.
Yeah. So like the next slide, I didn't know how, because like if we just go to the next slide, John, if
Yeah.
you just throw it up on the screen. So to me, the fact that the errors exist in other editions of the Bible, it does not mean that Joseph Smith did not use the 1769 edition of the King James Bible. Like it's not answering that. It's not answering the question. Like
if it were the case that they didn't exist in 1769 actually, and they were in all the others, and we know Joseph Smith had 1769, then it might have some sort of creeds. But the fact that it was just in all of them,
I mean, maybe they're saying he didn't necessarily use his family Bible.
sure,
okay, well,
but
he
like
used a Bible,
yeah,
and they admit as much. They say we don't know which one he plagiarized from.
I mean, I guess if he was doing most of his translation, in quotes, of the Book of Mormon at Isaac Hale's house, then he might have used a Bible that Isaac Hale had lying around.
well,
But
then
can
he was in the Whitmer's home. He was in different homes too.
Can you
Yeah.
grab the FAIR Mormon response again?
Just like go, yeah. If you throw that up on the screen, John.
Put it up on the screen.
Okay.
Because I think it's really important.
We'll
for
just say
people-
if any. So
Yeah.
yeah, read the final quote again.
Yeah. So they say, it makes it more difficult for us to claim with certainty which edition of the King James Version, if any, Joseph Smith plagiarized from. Imagine being a person who has discovered for the first time the CES letter and you read this and you're like, oh, okay, the church has published a response. I'm going to go to FAIR Mormon. I'm sure they're going to put Jeremy right. Imagine then reading the line, oh, it's more difficult for us to claim with certainty which edition of the King James Version, if any, Joseph Smith plagiarized from. Okay, so FAIR Mormon, now you're telling me that there's a possibility he plagiarized from it as well. So all they're having to concede that possibility. So it just goes to show that FAIR Mormon can often be the thing that is the final nail in the coffin for people. Because Jeremy asked the question, and then they realize that FAIR Mormon is forced to kind of give no good answer and actually concede.
I mean, honestly, it makes sense why FAIR Mormon is drifting into irrelevance. Nobody really quotes them anymore. Nobody, they're not being elevated by the church. It's now Jasmine Rappley or however you pronounce her name, and Book of Mormon Central and Scripture Central. Because I think FAIR Mormon is, shockingly falling into irrelevance because their answers are so bad. People who are leaving the church are saying it's FAIR Mormon's bad responses that contributed to their leaving. I mean, I hear that all the time.
Well, I think the thing that really put Scott Gordon on notice that his whole ship was sinking was that the This Is the Show videos went out, and that anyone thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
So cool. Sorry, let's carry on.
All right, Julia. What's number two?
Yeah,
so that's number
if
one. What's number two?
Yes, if you throw up on the screen. So Jeremy asks this, the second question that he asks in the Book of Mormon chapter is, what are 17th century KJV italics doing in the Book of Mormon? When King James translators were translating the KJV Bible between 1604 and 1611, they would occasionally put in their own words into the text to make the English more readable. We know exactly what these words are because they're italicized in the KJV Bible. What are these 17th century italicized words doing in the Book of Mormon? Word for word? What does this say about the Book of Mormon being an ancient record?
Let's go ahead and go to the next slide and illustrate. Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry to be confusing for the viewers. Jeremy put everything in italics, and then he bolded the parts that were italics. So if I had done this not the way Jeremy did it, everything would be in regular font except for the bold. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So some of the languages are dark, and those are the ones that are italicized. So for example,
So bold in this visual, bold means italicized.
right, but he
Okay.
italicized all of it. So yeah, sorry to be confusing.
Yeah.
So Malachi 3:10 in the KJV, it says, "And pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And there shall be room to receive it," are all italicized. And then in 3 Nephi 24:10, it says, "And pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it." So you see the presence of the same italicized words in that text that shouldn't be there, because those are what the monks are the translators for the KJV in 1604 and 1611. So Jeremy
Hang on.
says,
Monks. How long ago do you think the 1600s in the UK
"Oh, sorry."
were? We had flushing lavatories. Thank you. Never did quite, but
Okay. So Jeremy says, in the above example, the KJV translators added 7 italicized words to their English translation, which are not found in the source Hebrew manuscripts. Why does the Book of Mormon, which is supposed to have been completed by Moroni over 1400 years prior, contain the exact identical 7 italicized words of 17th century translators? And this is just one example of many. So yeah, so this
Julie,
isn't
I'm
just a
not
one-off.
understanding one thing. Are we saying that the same words italicized in the King James Version of the Bible are also italicized in the Book of Mormon?
I don't know if he italicized them, but
I
the
will
italicized,
check.
you can check. So I don't know if he italicized them specifically in the Bible or in, the Book of Mormon. I don't know why they would be. Because he's saying these are,
He's just saying the italicized, help me understand.
so
The words that are italicized in the Book of Mormon or in the Bible should or shouldn't be appearing in
they
the Book
should
of
not
Mormon?
be. So the people,
Shouldn't-
the Bible translators, so men in 1604 were like, oh, this doesn't make sense because it feels like it's sort of skipping around. So I'm just going to add words of I'm going to pull out of my own head some words to fill in the blanks. And so, for example, Malachi 3:10, they said, oh, there shall be room to receive it. So they're adding in these texts just to make it flow easier, just to make it make more sense to them. And those words that they came up with in 1604, 1611 are appearing in the Book of Mormon where they should not be. So,
Okay.
and Nemo, I don't know if you know.
I can, yeah. So I've just checked; they're not italicized.
Okay.
I think to explain this, Hebrew as a language has a different structure to English, the same as other languages have different structures to English, right? They'll put verbs in different orders, the sentence order will change, all that sort of stuff. Some languages will omit connective words that English will use. So what you end up with, if you're translating from Hebrew to English, is you need to add words into a sentence to make it flow in English, where it wouldn't flow, or where it would have already flowed in Hebrew because of the nature of the structure of the language. Similarly, if you were to look at Reformed Egyptian as a language, though we know nothing about it, you would also say that, in theory, would not be written in the same way as English, so you would need to add words. But those words that are added are distinctive decisions by the translators of the King James Version of the Bible in Oxford, in Cambridge, in Westminster. So again, the question is, why are there specific choices being reflected in this specific translation choices from a different language by Joseph Smith?
Because before and after, other words could have been chosen and likely have been chosen, correct?
Well, so where the word enough was italicized, there should not be enough room to receive it. You could have put in there would not be sufficient room to receive it. There should not be
Think so. Yeah.
Sorry, where it says be room, you could say there shall not be space enough to receive it. You could write instead rather than be room.
It's just that Oxford scholars his specific choice of words, right? So
So it's too much of a too much of a coincidence that God would always side on the word choice of Oxford and Cambridge scholars filling in their own, somewhat not arbitrary, but their own particular word choice.
Because to receive it could have been to obtain it, to
possess
to be
it,
gifted possess it, or whatever. There's loads of different ways you could have phrased it. They chose a specific one, and God always seems to, like you said, err on the side of what did they do in Oxford and Cambridge and Westminster in the 17th century.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So FAIR's response, they list out 4 different, answers to this. So they say, number 1, Joseph did not know about the italics. Number 2, the presence of italics from the KJV are not plagiarism. 3, the presence of italics do not mean that Joseph Smith did not translate. And 4, the presence of italics do not take away from the Book of Mormon being the most correct book.
Oh,
Why are you laughing, Nemo?
I love the first one. It's like Joseph Smith didn't know about the italics. I'm like, yeah, because if he did, he might have tried to change the words so that this argument would be made against him. That's probably what's going on here.
Well, I have a slide because I think that's interesting. Oh, I guess there's more. Well, I'm going to skip ahead just for 1 second. So I don't know if we can talk about this for a second, because I don't know if Joseph Smith did know about them. So in the Adam Clark commentary, so some critics have purported that Joseph Smith used the Adam Clark commentary. And John, you have episodes on this pretty recently, I think, too. So during his Bible translation, not the Book of Mormon, but the Bible one. The commentary was written in 8 parts between 1810 and 1826. In his 1832 account of the first vision, Joseph Smith claims that he was searching the scriptures from the age of 12 to 15. In speaking of added phrases in italics, Clark states, the words seem essentially necessary to a proper understanding of the text, and if not admitted on the above authority, they must be supplied in italics, as in our common translation. So I think at least at some point, Joseph Smith knew that the italics were not, how do I say that? They weren't on the original text.
The original text. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just think that's interesting. I don't know. Like, to me, it seems to point that if Joseph Smith was studying the Bible from the ages of 12 to 15, he would be aware of this fact, but maybe he wasn't, because like you said, Nemo, maybe he would have tried harder to change those words to make it seem like he was more authentic of a translator. But I don't know. That's just something I found. There's another.
Let's go back to FAIR Mormon's original response, the one before the Royal Skousen slide.
Yeah. Oh, the one before.
Is there anything else we want to say just about this FAIR Mormon argument? So basically, the point one, that Joseph Smith did not know about the italics, that's a dead point, because that doesn't excuse him from plagiarizing.
Right. I don't know why they would say that.
And in fact, it probably explains why he did something so dumb. That if he, like you said, Nemo, if he had known about the italics issue, he probably would have changed them or obscured them. Is that right?
Yeah, because what would make it seem more authentic is if you've got the Sermon on the Mount. What Joseph Smith seemed to think, I can't speak for him, but what this seems to point to is that Joseph Smith thinks that the King James Bible is the Word of God, in the way that some King James Version only people believe it now. And so that having the King James Version Bible in the Book of Mormon would make the Book of Mormon more authentic, because the revealed Word of God is in his scripture too. And that's what's going to make everyone think that his scripture is authentic, because it contains the Sermon on the Mount as found in the version of the Bible that everyone's reading, because that's the revealed Word of God. Whereas in actual fact, what would make it seem more authentic is if you have the Sermon in the Mount there, sure, but then you have it in slightly different language, because it's being reported on by slightly different people in a different hemisphere of the world. And so then Christ visited and he did what he always does. He gives the Sermon on the Mount. He teaches the things that he would have taught, but the people reporting on it report on it in a different way, in a slightly different language, because they're different people. That would have made it more authentic. Yeah.
Okay, what about the argument, just as clear of each very quickly. So what about the argument that the presence of italics from the King James Version are not plagiarism? What are they saying? It could just be coincidence?
They go through it in more in depth, I think, if I remember when I was reading this, but like, it doesn't make sense to me either. Cause but they are present. So how are you saying it's not plagiarism? Cause things can be plagiarized.
It could just be coincidence. It doesn't mean he stole it. It just means God could have provided it. In other words, Joseph did it. God did it, not Joseph. Maybe?
Yeah. You could make that argument that God gave Joseph Smith the exact words of 17th century Oxford clergymen. You can make that argument if you want, but that's the argument you're going to have to make. Otherwise, Joseph Smith took the work of those clergymen, including the italics that they chose because they chose them. They thought they were most appropriate, and he used them himself. And that is plagiarism. Using someone else's work as your own is textbook plagiarism.
This is like weird. Oh, go ahead, Julie. I
was going to say, if he did that, then number 3 doesn't make sense either. The presence of italics does not mean that Joseph Smith did not translate. But if he's using the Oxford,
like a weird logic seminar in college. You know what I mean? They're just basically going through formal logic exercise. Why, Julie? Why is that weird?
Well, because like if the Oxford scholars from 1604, 1611 are present in the Book of Mormon or present, then how does that not mean he didn't translate? Like how did he translate? Because like you said, Nemo, these would be in a different language. They were different people. They're different perspectives. Why are we getting those exact words? To me, that means he did not translate.
Yeah, but even if you say, okay, it didn't mean that Joseph didn't translate. the follow-on sentence is, it just means that the translation that was revealed to him by God is in the exact same language as the men in Oxford chose. And I keep saying the men in Oxford, even though it was Oxford, Cambridge, and Westminster, because Oxford was where Malachi was translated. It is, in this case, the Oxford clergyman, Reynolds and co.
All right, the last one is were you going to say something, Julie?
Oh, I'm just confused by everything. Like, because the seer stone, because the text from the Book of Mormon, as far as like David Whitmer or others, Emma, they said that it appeared on the stone, word for word. Mm-hmm. And so like, it's not really a translation anyway, because he's not looking at the text. He's not like trying to work out in his mind the words that would be appropriate from Reformed Egyptians to English. So
it's God's word. It's God's inspired word appearing on a rock that Joseph's reading. And then literally Martin Harris will read back what he wrote, and Joseph will say, yep, you got it. And then they'll move on. Like, it doesn't leave room for error.
Yeah. And that's confusing to me. Because if it's word for word, because Joseph said, if they spelled it wrong, if they wrote it down wrong, the words would not change until they fix that. And so like, it's a literal or word for word translation on the stone.
This is where I need to tell the participants of the LDS Discussion series what I've said every time. We've covered so much of this in depth in past episodes. So the best way to consume LDS discussions is to go back to the very beginning and watch them in sequence. We're what, 50 or 60 episodes now?
We're in the late 50s or early 60s, I think.
But I don't think I've met anybody that regrets starting from the beginning and just listening in sequence, because we do cover all these topics more in depth. Today, we're just doing the CES Letter slant.
Yeah, and one thing I could do to make it easier if you don't want to watch all the 50 or 60 of them is I can go through and put the specific episodes that pertain to what we're talking about today in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you want more details about this that we've just been talking about, I'm going to self-plug. I don't do it very often, but I have just released a video about why the church has to keep using the King James Version of the Bible, even though Uchtdorf recently in conference has been quoting from other versions. That's actually quite problematic. He shouldn't be doing it, because what we've established here is that God has given Joseph Smith, however you want to view the translation as working, he's given Joseph Smith the language of those translators in England in the 17th century. That's the words that he chose to reveal on the stone to Joseph Smith that then had to be written down exactly. So God's clearly giving some preference to the King James Version, which, to point 4, if you bring the slide up, the problem with that is when it says the presence of italics does not take away from the Book of Mormon being the most correct book, if any of those italicized choices have later been discovered to be based on a manuscript that was, had been messed with, or a manuscript that had additions that need to be removed and isn't as true as it could have been, then actually, yes, the presence of those italics could very well take away from the Book of Mormon being the most correct book, if the presence of any of those italics with later translations and further understanding of Hebrew and biblical scholarship shows that those italics shouldn't have been added, or they should have been phrased differently.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to their next response regarding Royal Skousen. Do you want to tell us who Royal Skousen is, Julia or Nemo?
So, to my knowledge, Royal Skousen is a Book of Mormon scholar, and he's done the most extensive research on the changes of the Book of Mormon. I read a lot of his stuff when I was an active member of the church. I really admired him. He's like compared the texts and seen. I don't know. I just really like him. I've seen a lot of his speeches. So he really
gets into the original printers.
He gets into the nitty gritty.
Well, yeah. And he's analyzed all the details from the original transcription to the printer's copy to all the subsequent versions. And anyway, so what does FAIR Mormon say about that?
So they say Royal Skousen has determined that of all the differences in the Bible quotations in the Book of Mormon, 23% involve italics. Of all the italics contained in the KJV, 38% are changed in some way in the Book of Mormon. Skousen sees these facts as evidence that Joseph did not know the meaning of the italics, since a much larger amount of changes do not involve italics, though other scholars read the same percentages as significant, as evidence that Joseph did know the meaning of the italics. So this to me just was interesting, because they're like, oh, it could mean that he didn't, or it could mean that he did. And so it doesn't really answer the question to me.
Well, yeah, because if he did or didn't, like if he didn't, then he's just making changes, and some include the italics and some don't. If he did, he would have made far more changes to the italics. If he knew what they meant, like we said, he would have changed a lot more of them to try and cover the idea that he was just copying these men from Oxford.
What about the 23% and the 28% and the 38% percentages. They're basically saying those are low percentages, so your case isn't very compelling.
I guess, but they also say scholars see this. Oh, 38 of them have changed in some way, and 23% are used in general. Like this means he did know about that. So but also he's one thought that came to me, Nemo, as you were speaking, is his audience are people who have studied the Bible. So one thing that he wants to do is he wants to I don't know if the right word is convince or to help. He wants to stay on the same kind of playing field as them. So if his Book of Mormon reflects more of the Bible the way that it is, they might believe it more. Rather, so maybe it's in his best interest to not change everything. That's just a thought that occurred to me, is that maybe he's trying to help.
That's what I was kind of saying about him believing the King James Version of the Bible to be the revealed word of God. Like the more his Book of Mormon looks like the King James Version of the Bible, the more convincing it is to the contemporaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But
all right, well, let's go ahead and go to the next argument from the CES letter. So far, I don't know if I'm right, but it seems like Jeremy 2, FAIR Mormon, or critics of Jeremy 0. That's my count so far. What do y'all think? Do y'all agree with that?
Well, I mean, I agree with that because I just don't like their answers. I don't think they stand up.
And Jeremy brings receipts. He's showing the evidence, so you got to refute the evidence, right?
Yeah,
and
it's not just.
Go on.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it's not just Jeremy. I quoted Grant Palmer. There's other scholars too that are not just Jeremy that have studied more. Grant Palmer is a historian. There's other people that, or even Skousen to some degree seems to be suggesting that he did change the italics or use italics or things like that. So it's not just Jeremy. There's a bunch of other people that have addressed these issues.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, Jeremy has a habit of what I call top loading his chapters in the CES letter. His strongest arguments go up top. So I think as we go through these, we're going to see more room for okay, I can see where FAIR Mormon might be coming from, or this or that. But he certainly starts with his strongest points, and these are some strong points. And I think they definitely merit a good amount of discussion.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the third.
Okay, so his third question is, why does the Book of Mormon follow the King James version of the Bible, not the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible? And so the Book of Mormon, he says the Book of Mormon includes mistranslated Bible passages that were later changed in Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible. These Book of Mormon verses should match the inspired Joseph Smith translation version instead of the incorrect King James version that Joseph Smith later fixed.
And so for those who, go ahead, Julie.
Oh, no, you can go.
Yeah, so for those who just, and again, we have LDS Discussions episodes specifically, not just on the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, but also noting that the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible weirdly reflects recommendations of changes made in that Adam Clark commentary that we know Joseph Smith likely had access to, that you, Julia, discussed earlier in the episode. So basically, as I understand it, the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible has been debunked as itself being likely too close to plagiarism in modern times. But even if we were to grant that the Joseph Smith translation were authentic, in other words, that Joseph Smith took aside the Bible and corrected it and fixed all the inaccuracies and translation errors, at least in the New Testament, then, which he did after the Book of Mormon was published, then if Joseph Smith corrected the Bible to the correct words, and if God directed both the translation of the Book of Mormon and Joseph's correction of the Bible, then we would expect the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible to be word for word the same as the way that the Bible, the Book of Mormon, reflects the Bible. Did I get that right, Nemo, or did I munge that up?
Well,
Maybe
I think
you can state it in your own words.
Job to get the concise version is, if Joseph Smith saw a problem in the King James version of the Bible and saw the need to change it using the Joseph Smith translation, which he often did, then why are the parts of the King James version that appear in the Book of Mormon reflecting the King James version and not the corrections that Joseph Smith made? I.e., if there's a passage from the King James version of the Bible in the Book of Mormon that's been corrected by Joseph Smith, why was it not corrected at the time at which he put it in the Book of Mormon? Right?
Yeah. Love it. And then, Julia, Jeremy brings receipts. Is that right?
Well, this might be one. I can't remember if Nemo, you brought this one to my attention, or if Jeremy talks about this specific one. He might.
It's the Sermon on the Mount, isn't it?
Okay. And
yes.
basically, if viewers want to we haven't called out the differences and similarities here, but if viewers and listeners want to pause on this, they can read the differences between the third Nephi version of the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 13 versus the Matthew 6 version of the Sermon on the Mount in the King James Version versus the Matthew 6 version of the Joseph Smith translation, and see that they're substantively different. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, as they're looking at them, if they just listen to my voice as they look, I'll talk them through it real quick. The middle column is what was written by those translators in Oxford, Cambridge, and Westminster. That's the King James Version of the Bible, is the middle column. Joseph Smith put word for word that middle column into the Book of Mormon. So he put the words of the King James Version of the Bible into the Book of Mormon and printed the Book of Mormon in 1830. Then later on, Joseph Smith goes, the King James Version of the Bible needs some correcting. One of the areas of the King James Version of the Bible that needs correcting happens to be that middle column, Matthew 6, 25, 27. So on the right, we see what he then corrected it to. So he's changed it. But the question is, if Joseph Smith was getting divine inspiration from God that allows him to correct what was wrong with the Bible, why did he not correct it before he put it into the Book of Mormon?
That seems like a slam dunk to me.
It feels pretty conclusive. I'm never one to make outlandish claims, but it feels fairly solid. I've said it enough times now out loud. It feels quite concrete.
Yeah, and I've had people tell me that in and of itself caused them to lose their faith in the divinity of the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. What's FAIR Mormon's response, Julia?
Convoluted, I'm sure.
John, do you want to actually read this one?
Yeah, FAIR Mormon argues against this being a point of concern by stating, quote, Joseph had different purposes in mind in his different translations. This is not unique or unusual in Scripture, even the Bible. Hence, neither the Book of Mormon nor the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible can be discounted because of seeming discrepancies with each other or with the King James Version of the Bible. Just right off, what they seem to be saying is God wants people to have one understanding when they, of Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, when they read the King James Version of the Bible or the Book of Mormon, but then when they read the Joseph Smith translation, God wants them to have a different understanding when they read the Joseph Smith translation. Is that the argument there? Nemo, you're muted.
I think I was laughing too hard. I had to mute myself. I think the argument seems to be Joseph Smith had different purposes in mind for the different translations, but they don't. Maybe they go on to say what those were, but my initial thought is, right, okay, what were they? Because what purpose could his translation of the Bible have other than his self-stated purpose, which is to correct the things in it which aren't correct?
And I haven't even read the second paragraph yet because it's such a dumb argument just logically, right? Yeah. It's like God is not an author of confusion. He's not going to want to have different versions of the same text depending on people's unique situations. Almost like God is thinking, when people read the Bible or the Book of Mormon, they're going to have a certain set of needs, but I can predict that when they read the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, all of the people that read that version are going to be having different needs. And so I'm going to reword it for the needs of those people. It's just ridiculous.
Julia, you went on a mission, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, John, you served a mission. Either of you do the object lesson with the 2 nails and the piece of paper?
I don't remember.
So the Bible is the first nail.
Oh, yeah.
And the piece of paper is God's doctrine. And with the first nail, the doctrine can be turned and twisted in all those different ways. You put the second nail in, and God's doctrine becomes clear. The Book of Mormon is there to clarify God's doctrine as found in the Bible. So when parts of the doctrine of the Bible are found in the Book of Mormon and then are corrected, how is the Book of Mormon helping clarify the Bible? The Book of Mormon isn't. It's the Joseph Smith translation that later then clarifies it. So it's having to clarify both the Bible and the Book of Mormon.
Well, FAIR would say that the Joseph Smith translation is just a third nail that makes it even more solid.
Yeah, but why wasn't that just added in at the point at which God was revealing word for word?
Because 3 nails is better than 2, Nemo.
That's a very American attitude of you, John.
Bigger is better.
Okay.
More is more.
More.
Anyway, I'll read really quickly FAIR Mormon's explanation. Joseph Smith had different purposes in mind. And by the way, it's not Joseph Smith, it's God, right? Is it Joseph Smith? Is this translated by Joseph Smith or by the gift and power of God? If it's the gift and power of God, it's not Joseph Smith making the changes, it's God. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you wouldn't say the Book of Mormon was published to bring about Joseph Smith's purpose. You would say it's published to bring about God's purpose, right? Yeah.
So I think that discounts FAIR Mormon's response at the top. But anyway, Joseph Smith had different purposes in mind when, and by the way, who is FAIR Mormon to tell us what Joseph Smith's purposes are or aren't? How do they know? Right? Did Joseph Smith ever write down why he, used certain words in the Book of Mormon?
Have you not seen the letter, John? That says, have you not seen the letter in Joseph Smith's own hand that says, "Dear Scott Gordon, my purpose in writing this is."
Yeah. Anyway, Joseph Smith had different purposes in mind when bringing forth the Book of Mormon and the Joseph Smith translation. His purpose of bringing forth the Book of Mormon was to witness the reality that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself on all nations, departing from the King James Version, i.e., the translation familiar to those who would become the Book of Mormon's first readers, would have been a stumbling block in achieving its purpose. Why are you laughing, Julia?
Wait, didn't we just talk about this? Where they said like Joseph's audience was, isn't that kind of what they're saying?
I raised
to change
this point that
to change it would be a stumbling block to those first readers to the Book of Mormon, because they're all like Methodists or Presbyterian or people who are really invested in the Bible. Like, anyway, just think that was really funny that they're. Anyway,
I was told the Book of Mormon was written for our day.
Yeah.
Right? Not the dudes 200 years ago, but for our day.
1829.
But I mean, they're making the point that I made, right? That the King James Version is familiar to the people at the time, and that would make it seem more authentic. That's the literal point they're making is, well, if he'd not put the exact words of the King James Bible in, it would have seemed less authentic to people. Not understanding, FAIR Mormon, as we've explained, that actually, if you understand the Bible, it would have been more authentic to have it be different.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just go ahead and finish. Departing from the King James Version, i.e., the translation familiar to those who would become the Book of Mormon's first readers, would have been a stumbling block in achieving its purpose. On the other hand, Joseph's later purpose, according to Scott Gordon, in bringing forth the Joseph Smith translation, is largely understood to have been one of redaction or inspired commentary or plagiarism of the Adam Clark commentary, better said, to resolve confusion regarding biblical interpretation, hence the different wording and in some cases, even content. All right, well, what grade do y'all give FAIR Mormon's justification?
Oh, I don't give it a grade. I'm not grading it. I'm not wasting my time grading it. It's just, I'm not normally this annoyed by FAIR Mormon. I'm usually quite calm about this stuff, but this is just so poor on their part to try and say that, oh, well, the Joseph Smith translation was the bit that was meant to, correct poor understanding of biblical doctrine. When I was certainly taught, as I explained with that object lesson, and you will have taught people, the Book of Mormon was the thing. We believe the Bible to be the word of God as far as it is translated correctly. We believe the Book of Mormon to be the word of God. That's the article of faith. But it seems then the Book of Mormon was also not translated correctly because parts of it that draw from the King James Version had to be corrected by Joseph Smith later.
Yeah.
So at worst, this means that the Book of Mormon wasn't translated correctly because the words
it means that God has different translations for different purposes at different times, Nemo. That's what it means.
Is that the same way that God approved selections volumes of the Book of Mormon so that some people didn't have to learn about the racist parts of the Book of Mormon in their native language?
Exactly.
Got you.
Or the modalist / Trinitarian version of God.
Yeah.
God didn't want to go full, God and Jesus are separate beings when the Book of Mormon was originally released, because that would have been too hard on the Protestants of the day. He needed that milk of a Trinitarian / modalist God Jesus in 1830, but then by 1835 or 1838, the Protestants had progressed enough such that they were ready for the meat of the Book of Mormon being changed to say that God and Jesus were separate beings, right?
Because if you're going to bring about a radical restorationist doctrine and claim to restore Christ's true church, you've got to do it in baby
It's the
steps.
piecemeal. It's got to be milk before meat, milk before meat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, regardless of the fact that this is all taking place amongst massive religious revival and everyone is up for finding out a new church and finding out a new way to be, you can't take them too far from their Methodist roots. That's why you've got to have King Benjamin giving a Methodist sermon halfway through the book just so it's familiar. Is that about right?
Not to mention,
Sorry,
Nephites baptizing. Not to mention Nephites baptizing in the name of Jesus before Jesus had been born.
Yes, yeah. We've also got that. Just for, and it's all for familiarity. It's not anachronistic. It's for familiarity for the reader. Yeah.
And
All right.
this is kind of going. Well, I just want to add, kind of going on the same strain. Nemo, that little pamphlet you held up by Hugh Nibley.
Uh-huh.
He in there he says, if Joseph Smith were to, I think in some respect, he says, if Joseph were to stand up in general conference today, everything would be familiar to him. Like nothing has changed since his day. But I'm pretty sure, like, if the church was the way that it is now back in 1830, I don't think that people would have joined the church, or to some degree, because it's too different. Because like you said, baby steps from 1830 to 2025. Like, I think it's too different to me. Like, because they keep changing things. But
yeah.
Anyway, I can find that reference later. Okay,
No,
so
it's good.
So one of
I
the
got a
things
couple other slides.
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to add is just to remind the viewers of how the Book of Mormon came to be. And so this is a 2016 seminar for new mission presidents given by Russell Nelson, so the current president of the church. And he says, he just reminds us, David Whitmer wrote, Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat and put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light. And in the darkness, the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear, and another character with the interpretation would appear. Thus, the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, and not by any power of man. That was from David Whitmer. And so, like, FAIR Mormons were saying that Joseph Smith had different purposes in mind for the translation. That doesn't make any sense to me. Or how do I make sense of that? Because the Book of Mormon is he's saying it's a word for word. It's exactly, it wouldn't change until they got it right. I don't see how Joseph is getting into how is Joseph getting into the text if that's how the translation happened?
Because God chose to give him incorrect passages from the King James Version of the Bible to put into the Book of Mormon that he knew Joseph would then later go on and correct. That's the narrative you have to believe. And people will say, oh, why are you going to David Whitmer? Why are you going to, to A Message to All Believers in Christ? I think that's the pamphlet that's from, right? Why are you doing that when there's other accounts, etc.? Ultimately, it doesn't matter what we choose to do. That is what the current prophet of the Mormon Church has taught, right? And we know that according to Ezra Taft Benson, a living prophet is more important than a dead prophet. And he is the current living prophet of the church. So that's what he's teaching. That should be enough for any member to go, yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
The man who speaks for God backs David Whitmer on this, is what I'm getting at there. So,
yeah, so
argue with him if you want. But
yeah.
And Nemo, if you wonder why I cut to you, it's because I caught you eating a snack. So can you show us what you're eating? Is it a Jimmy Dodger? Is it?
Yeah, sure. Snack time with Nemo. We'll now take a short break. It is Texas barbecue flavored Pringles.
Texas.
And just to be clear, are we officially endorsed by Pringles, or is that?
We are not. That okay. It's just what I choose to eat. I mean, we do these recordings at dinner time. For like all 60 episodes of this have always been recorded when I should be eating, which is why we have the infamous Dorito Gate, and we now have my Pringles.
Pringles Gate.
Yeah.
Okay, Julia, thank you for that break, Nemo. Okay, so Julia, these other slides are kind of under point 3. Are they still following the King James point, or are they kind of the Joseph Smith translation point, or are they other points?
They're just other points. So
okay,
I guess
go ahead and read them off. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I'm a big fan of Grant Palmer and his book, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins. I think everyone should read it. But in there, he talks about, so this is just my other Bible problems. And in there, I don't know if we want to go through all these things. I think they're fascinating.
Go ahead.
He talks about the similarities. So he says, Grant Palmer lists 20 similarities in chronological order between Nephi and Moses. And so I'll just kind of go through them briefly, which I think is fascinating because if Joseph Smith had a Bible in front of him, which it seems like he did, because he's getting the exact words from the italicized words or the exact phrases used, I think he absolutely had a Bible in front of him.
Oh,
Yes,
and we know he was familiar with it, right? He studied it anyway.
Yes.
So.
And I do know that I will say that Emma did say that he didn't have any book or script with him. He wouldn't have been able to keep that from him. But I don't know if she would have discounted or been like, oh, the Bible doesn't count. Because like if Joseph, I don't know, to me, that makes more sense. It makes sense to have a Bible in the room for inspiration, for like just comparing, just to have it in there. And it wouldn't have caused me concern if I was Emma in that moment. But anyway, but I do understand that people say that he didn't have a book with him. But so going back to the list, Graham Palmer with Nephi and Moses in the exact chronological order. They both know the Egyptian language. They live in luxury and they leave it behind because their lives are threatened. They each justifiably kill a man before becoming a prophet. They both receive through a vision a warning to escape into the wilderness. God promises them that they will lead their people to the promised land. They camp at the Red Sea. They are provided divine means to lead them, a pillar of cloud or a liahona. At the Red Sea, the people lose their faith and begin to murmur. While camped at the Red Sea, God arranges to have an opponent slain. Sorry. Yeah, Pharaoh's horsemen and then Laban. The names of the place are Shur or Shazer, which are very similar. They move several times before camping in the most fertile parts. Both groups of people, Israelites and Nephites, murmur about hunger. Directions from a cloud or liahona provide food, manna, or wild beasts. Accusations erupt against the leader for bringing them into the wilderness. They yearn to return home. They travel many days. Key people die. You have Ishmael dies or Miriam dies, which leads to more complaining. Moses and Nephi are accused of being a prince or ruler over them. The leaders' lives are threatened. God speaks to his people. Starvation is avoided. Despite many miracles, the people are unrepentant. Because of transgressions of the people wander in the wilderness. Moses and Nephi ascend the mount to speak to God. The people rebel by dancing and singing, and they forget the Lord. God is displeased, threatens destruction. They eventually repent and reach the promised land. So, like, to me, that's like
pretty compelling.
Right?
Basically, when Joseph Smith was trying to come up with a core narrative to begin the Book of Mormon, especially after the 116 pages had been lost, it's almost like he just swapped out some of the names and locations, but basically just did a remix of the story of Moses and the Exodus.
Mormon Book of Exodus, yeah.
Interesting. That's actually quite compelling.
And he wouldn't have needed a copy of the Bible. This is kind of what I was getting at before. He wouldn't have needed a copy of the Bible in the room with him to do that. Because
if you know the story,
which I think most people that even aren't that familiar with the Bible know a lot about the story of Moses. It's one of the big biblical stories. So he would to know that sort of archetypal story or that sort of story of a people wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have even needed the book in the room with him.
So so there's the final quote, if I can read that. So this is Graham Palmer. He says, "It is remarkable that many of the Nephite ideas and events occur at the same point in the chronology and at similar places as in the Israelite wilderness experience. These 20 shared motifs suggest dependency on the Bible Exodus story." So I just really like that whole list. It's very compelling to me. And like you said, Nemo, he doesn't even have to have the Bible in the room. If he's been studying it from 12 to 15, like he would have just known the story. And like, even after seeing the 10 Commandments, like several times growing up, I could probably say these things too. Anyway, but yeah, I just think that's a really interesting thing to me.
Now, the CES letter doesn't mention that Grant Palmer's argument, right?
No, it doesn't. I just added that because it was fascinating to me. And
Julia, maybe you need to write your own CES letter.
Oh,
CES
maybe.
letter 2.
But also another thing that I'll add that Graham Palmer talks about is the story of Lazarus and then King Lamoni. He says there's exact language that is only used with Lazarus that is also used exactly with King Lamoni. So to me, it shows a dependency for those two stories on the same text. So anyway, but Graham Palmer, his book is amazing. Everyone should go read it. Okay.
Maybe we'll do an LDS discussion series on his book.
Yeah, his book is so good.
I've still not read it. I'd be up for that.
Oh yeah, you should read it.
Okay, so I think it's 3-0, Jeremy and CES letter. No valid critiques so far against 3 of Jeremy's main points against the Book of Mormon. So it's 3-0 Jeremy winning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the next one, number 4, is why does the DNA of the Native Americans not support the Book of Mormon? And then DNA analysis has concluded that Native American Indians do not originate from the Middle East or from Israelite, but rather from Asia, or from Israelites, but rather Asia. why did the church change the following section of the introduction page in the 2006 edition of the Book of Mormon shortly after the DNA results were released? So the original text was the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. That was later changed in 2006 to say the Lamanites, and they are among the ancestors of the American Indians.
And is it our understanding that the title page of the Book of Mormon was translated by the Urim and Thummim and the Seer Stone by the Gifted Power of God? That wasn't just something added as a publication matter, right?
So there's two different things. There's the title page and the introduction. The introduction is not a literal translation, purported literal translation, and the title page is. So this is not something that would have been in the gold plates.
Okay.
So yeah, and then the book that
But
Nemo
the
just held
church
up.
changed it, and they changed it pretty soon after the DNA evidence came out. And Nemo, tell us what you're showing us.
So this is a book by my friend Simon Southerton, which is called Losing a Lost Tribe, Native Americans' DNA and the Mormon Church. This book got him excommunicated, and it's a book that essentially lays out the argument through the DNA that the Native Americans are not genetically related to folks from the Middle East.
And just to give credit where credit is due, it was actually Thomas Murphy, an anthropologist in the state of Washington, that first came out with these DNA findings while I was working at Microsoft, actually. And he was threatened with excommunication, literally for just revealing the science as an academic. And then word was spread that his pending excommunication was going to happen. The news media showed up at the chapel where he was going to be excommunicated, and then the church called off the disciplinary council because I think they didn't want to bring news media attention to the fact that the Book of Mormon had been debunked by DNA evidence. So not just thank you to Simon Southerton, whose book was heavily influential to me when I was questioning these things, but also to Dr. Thomas Murphy. And we've had both Thomas Murphy and Simon on Mormon Stories multiple times, so we can include links to those as well.
And yeah, for sure.
All right, Julia,
Yeah.
what
And so
does
the
the
next slide-
Gospel Topics essay say?
Yeah, so I didn't have a FAIR Mormon response because there isn't one. And the Gospel Topics essay admits to this. John, do you want to read this one?
Gospel Topics essay, Book of Mormon and DNA Studies. So the church published this essay, quote, "The evidence assembled to date suggests that the majority of Native Americans carry largely Asian DNA. Scientists theorize that in an era that predated Book of Mormon accounts, a relatively small group of people migrated from Northeast Asia to the Americas by way of a land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska, otherwise known as the Bering Strait. These people, scientists say, spread rapidly to fill North and South America and were likely the primary ancestors of modern American Indians." So there we have the Mormon Church in 15-ish, acknowledging the DNA problem. So Jeremy wins point number 4.
And when you say the church, I think it Ugo Perez, I think is the Italian geneticist that the church works with. I think he put a lot into that essay.
But if the church removes his name and then publishes it on their website and in their LDS Tools app, it's the church giving their imprimatur. Yeah.
My point is they get these Perego, Ugo Perego, I think. They get him to write this for them, and then they publish it. It's not written by the First Presidency. It's put out, it's official by the church. But my point is they kind of hide behind these authors who you have to kind of dig and find who they are. But he's a church
and they
employee.
hide the essays themselves because most bishops that I've interviewed, most former bishops, actually I should say current or former bishops that I've interviewed on Mormon Stories, did not know about the Gospel Topics essays while they were serving as bishops. And that includes people who just this year or last year were serving as bishops. So the church has done a masterful job of making these essays available, but keeping their availability a complete secret from even their bishops and stake presidents, which is pretty masterful, if you ask me. Julia, did you want to talk about this Deseret News article that came out in 2007?
Actually, Nemo, do you mind reading that? Because I think it kind of segues into your clip that we're going to show next.
Sure. Cool. So the headline is Debate Renewed with Change in Book of Mormon Introduction. The change was made in the second edition published by Doubleday, a hardcover book that eliminates the footnotes Latter-day Saints see in their church-published books. The Doubleday edition is designed to be reader-friendly for non-Latter-day Saints who are encountering the book for the first time. Last year's change takes into account details of Book of Mormon demography which are not known, according to church spokesman Mark Tuttle. The change will be included in the next edition of the Book of Mormon printed by the church.
Thank you. And that was published in November 8th of 2007 when this Deseret News article was published.
So what did that just say? What did that tell us, Nemo? Can you summarize?
So the church has said, yes, we've made a change to the introduction of the Book of Mormon, or the title page. We've made a change to that statement about who the progeny of the Native Americans are, or the Lamanites are, rather. We've made a change to that because we do not know things about Book of Mormon demography, which they used to claim to know, but now they're saying we don't know because the evidence has changed, which is fair enough.
Prophets, seers, and revelators for 200 years knew exactly who the Lamanites were.
Yeah,
they were all the Native Americans in Central, South, and North America, and the Pacific Islanders, and they were called Lamanites for 2 centuries. Basically,
they were running around calling New Zealanders Haygoth's people. They were, you know what I mean?
Who's a character from the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we develop amnesia about, who the Lamanites were. Okay, what's this video about?
So Nemo, this is yours. I think this is kind of you called a newer research, which I think is very interesting from your channel.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's just play this one. If you'll put it up on the screen, John. Yeah, there we go.
So do you remember when I told you that the Mormon Church changed the introduction of the Book of Mormon in 2006 so that the phrase, "they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians," now reads, "they are among the ancestors of the American Indians," when it comes to the Lamanites. Many have postulated that this was done in response to DNA evidence that made the original position untenable. But I've recently learned that they haven't made this change consistently in every language. It all started when a German individual reached out to say the copy of the Book of Mormon they were given by the missionaries, printed in 2023, contained the phrase, "Diese sind die Hauptvorfahren der amerikanische Indianer." Auf English, the word Hauptvorfahren would be best translated as principal or main ancestors. And it's the same for the German copy of the Book of Mormon that's in PDF form on the church's website. That one was printed in June 2011, 5 years after the narrative changed. So the claim that the Lamanites were the principal ancestors of the Native Americans, which the church abandoned in 2006 in English, remains in multiple places in German 17 years later in 2023 prints, which are being given to people 19 years after the narrative was first altered in English. But here's where it gets really odd. On the church's website in the online gospel library, the phrasing has been changed to a phrase which translates as "among the ancestors." So why would the church have the new narrative on one part of the website, but continues to supply in print and PDF form the old narrative? And perhaps more significantly, is this a one-off, or could this be the case in other languages? Let me know in the comments.
Okay.
Do you?
Yeah, what? I thought that was
sorry. I had
very
a cold.
interesting. I think that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I had other people reach out to me and say that in some other languages, I couldn't recall them off the top of my head, it's the same. They haven't changed it. And it's bizarre to me that the church wouldn't change this consistently. It's not like they don't have the means to do it. It's not like, oh, that was an old copy of the book. Like I said, that book was printed in 2023. Like it came off the printing press in 2023, 17 years after the change was made in English. Like that's just wild. What could possibly cause the church to take 17 years to change it when we know they can change it in German because they've changed it in the Gospel Library app?
Maybe people in Germany aren't complaining about that being an issue. Like I wonder why they didn't change it, because they have the funding for it. They have the means to change it, like you said. But why not change it?
Do they not view it as an important thing? Because I would argue it's a very significant claim, claiming the ancestral relationship between Lamanites and Native Americans. It's a huge part of the claim of the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Like who you think those people are matters.
Yeah, I don't know.
How odd.
I thought that was just interesting.
That's what's going on there. So in English, we had that change in 2006, but other people are still, I guess what I'm saying is other people, the person who reached out is a potential convert to the church, and they're being given a copy of a book that teaches a narrative about that ancestral relationship that the church doesn't support anymore.
Yeah. And I'll just add, a couple things. We've covered the mound builder myth on various episodes of Mormon Stories podcast and on LDS Discussions series. But what we know is that this idea that number one, we know, I would say, potentially for me, the most fatal, argument against the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon is simply the narrative that God cursed the wicked Lamanites with dark skin, because it suggests that when God doesn't like someone, or when God doesn't like something that they're doing, he curses them with dark skin, because dark is bad, dark is worse, should be associated with being evil or wicked or naughty or perverse or adulterous or polygamous or whatever it is. And that's not only super racist and disgusting and wrong. And by the way, it also says in the Book of Mormon that God turned the Lamanites skin dark so that the Lamanites wouldn't be attractive to the Nephites who are white. That suggests that dark-skinned people are less attractive to white-skinned people. And even though racism exists, that doesn't mean that white people don't find dark people sexually attractive, even if they are racist against them. So, because we know that plenty of slave master white slave owners, in colonial America had sex with their African slaves, including Thomas Jefferson. So anyway, that narrative of, God cursing wicked people with dark skin is not only super racist, it's not original. So we know that decades before, even centuries before Joseph Smith writes that narrative into the Book of Mormon, there was a myth that existed in colonial America that all these, mounds and artifacts, that were so impressive, and tools and pottery and art, they were actually so impressive, says the mound builder myth, that these dark Native Americans that we found when, the pilgrims or the explorers came to America, there's no way these dark, loathsome Native Americans could have ever created any art or architecture that was worthwhile. So clearly there must have been a white, ancestors to these dark, loathsome Native Americans who created these mounds and these civilizations and these buildings and this art, because only white people can make art and architecture and sophisticated civilizations. Dark people can't do it. Not only, that perception, that myth, that mound builder myth has been found by Gerald and Sandra Tanner to be in at least 10 different books that were written in the 1820s or before, that Joseph Smith would have had access to, including View of the Hebrews, which was a book written by, I think the pastor of Oliver, Ethan Smith, the pastor of Oliver Cowdery. So it's just an awful narrative, and it's an unoriginal narrative. And again, it's another pre-existing narrative that Joseph Smith would have likely just, remixed and imported into the Book of Mormon. So I just had to kind of mention that, because I think that's, but it's also worse, because then, as we mentioned, for 200 years, Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators would tell Native Americans, Latin Americans, and Pacific Islanders that they were the descendants of these wicked, evil, dark-skinned Lamanites, which isn't just racist and incorrect. It's also it's erasing entire civilizations of people. It's erasing their actual ancestry, which would have been Asiatic in origin. It's erasing their ancestry and telling them that they're the descendants of these fictitious, evil, characters that are as real as hobbits or elves or dwarfs that Joseph Smith wrote into the Book of Mormon. Sorry, I had to go on that diatribe.
No, that's good. And I just wanted to add to not just the Tanners, but Dan Vogel has a book called Indian Origins in the Book of Mormon, which also is really good. And he makes a lot of the same similarities of the mound builders and things like that were prevalent in Joseph Smith's time in the 1800s. So just that's
and
just
there's also
one.
a book called The Mound Builder's Myth that touches on this as well.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And just so y'all aren't worried, Nemo and Julia, we're going to cover through 5 in today's episode, and we're gonna split off this this particular presentation into 2 parts,
Sure.
and we're gonna cover 6 through 11 in the next episode. So y'all
Sounds great.
be worried about time if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Nemo and Julie, anything else you want to make about point number 4?
Well, now we're cutting it in half. Let me. I've got another 3-hour soliloquy that we can go on now that we have time. No, I think that explains it pretty well, John. To be honest, I think there's not much more to be said here. The DNA evidence is pretty robust, I think, and the church, has had to shift, as they often do. And the reason there's no FAIR Mormon response for it is because the responses to this kind of thing are so niche that they revolve generally around things like, oh, well, we don't know exactly what DNA we're looking for, and there's like DNA sort of dissolution through time. There's other arguments about there's this
Genetic
idea
drift, bottlenecking. There's bottlenecking. There's genetic drift.
There's the weird idea that there was actually a civilization of people already on the American continent, and that these people just joined in, like the Nephites just turned up and joined in and assimilated, and so their DNA got lost. I mean, that's just completely ignoring what the Book of Mormon teaches about it being a land preserved for them.
Yeah.
But we can just selectively ignore what the Book of Mormon teaches when we're trying to defend something, can't we?
And also the Book of Mormon says that the land to the north and to the central and the south were filled with people. It doesn't mean some little small pueblo in Latin America. The Book of Mormon makes it clear it's North, Central, and South America. And by the way, the Hill Cumorah that Joseph Smith found the plates in, that Moroni allegedly buried the plates in, is in upstate New York, not some teeny little Mesoamerican hill.
Yeah.
So unless you come up with the 2 Hill Cumorah theory, which is ridiculous.
And goes against what the footnotes of the Book of Mormon used to say up until the early 1900s. Like, it was in the footnotes of the Book of Mormon that the land, like the Great Water was Lake Ontario, and like this is the hill where just.
Yeah, we're about to talk about that. Do you want to just go ahead and talk about the next point?
Into that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just jumped to the slides about question 5.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So Jeremy, the 5th question that he asked about the Book of Mormon is, why are there anachronisms in the Book of Mormon? And he says horses, cattle, oxen, sheep, swine, goats, elephants, wheels, chariots, wheat, silk, steel, and iron did not exist in pre-Columbia America during the Book of Mormon times. Why are these things mentioned in the Book of Mormon as being made available in the Americas between 2200 BC to 421 AD? Because the Book of Ether. So that is why he's dating that so far back. He says unofficial apologists claim victories in some of these items, but closer inspection reveals significant problems. It has been documented that apologists have manipulated wording so that steel is not steel, sheep become never domesticated bighorn sheep, horses become tapirs, etc.
And if it's okay, Julie, I'm just going to say, for sure, one of the top 5 most important episodes I've ever done on Mormon Stories is with the Yale Mesoamerican anthropologist, Dr. Michael Coe. And I did 2 rounds of interviews with him. He's the world expert, like Robert Ridner was the world expert in Egyptology. Michael Coe was the world's expert in Central America, Mesoamerica during the time of the Book of Mormon. And, I go through this list with him in my interview, and we need to basically just re-release that Michael Coe interview on YouTube because so many people haven't heard it. But I basically say, during the time frame of the Book of Mormon, Dr. Michael Coe, were there horses in the Americas? And he'd say no. And then I'd say, were there cattle? And he'd say no. Were there oxen? No. Sheep? No. Swine? No. Goats? No. Elephants? No. Wheels? No. Chariots? No. He would say wheels, okay, there might have been toys with wheels, but no wheels big enough to actually fit onto carts. Were there chariots? No. Wheat? No. Silk? No. Steel? No. Iron? No. And he basically just completely validates this list. And then, what you'll then see is FAIR Mormon apologists or Farms apologists or Maxwell Institute apologists try and just harvest from, scholarship possible exceptions. But overall, just all the food, all the animals, all the technologies that Joseph Smith had access to in the 1820s somehow miraculously appear in the Book of Mormon as if they were around in 600 BC or 1000 BC or 2000 BC in ways that are ridiculous. But also Michael Coe points out that there's all sorts of food and animals and technologies that Native Americans did have, right? Like tomatoes, like corn, like chocolate, like tapirs, jaguars. There are all sorts of animals and food and technologies that should be in the Book of Mormon that are not in the Book of Mormon. And for all those reasons, even the Mormon Church today in 2025, even Richard Bushman, even Terrell Givens, they're all acknowledging that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century document. It is not an ancient document. It's just not.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting half of the argument is the things that should be in the Book of Mormon that aren't. I think that's often overlooked, I think. So
yeah, for sure. And on the next slide, John, I just have other episodes that cover these anachronisms as well. You have historian Shannon Caldwell Montez, who talks about these anachronisms. And these are just a couple of her episodes. I think she's been on more times than just these two.
And basically her point was that the church historian B.H. Roberts, who was into science, right? He discovered all this stuff in the 1900s, 1910s, and became so alarmed that he held a secret Mormon meeting in 1922 called literally all the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and all the general authorities together in Salt Lake City and named off all these problems with the linguistics of the Book of Mormon, with the geography of the Book of Mormon, with the archaeology of the Book of Mormon, and put them all on notice as early as 1922 that there were significant reasons to doubt the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And that's just proven. Check out Shannon Caldwell Montez's Secret Mormon Meetings of 1922, along with the rise and fall of LDS Church historian and general authority B.H. Roberts. And there's even an episode called Did B.H. Roberts Lose His Testimony in the Historicity of the Book of Mormon? Those are essential Mormon stories episodes. Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, no, that's great. So actually, this next slide is about what Nemo was saying is how some of the footnotes have specifically pointed to very specific locations. Nemo, do you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure. For Ether 15:2, it states, there had been slain 2 millions of mighty men and their wives and their children on the hill Cumorah. The footnote reads, including wives and children, the numbers very probably must have been from 10 to 15 millions. For Ether 15:8, for the waters of Ripley Ancam, the footnote reads, supposed to be Lake Ontario, or supposed to be Lake Ontario. These footnotes are in both the 1879 and the 1911 Chicago editions of the Book of Mormon. Other footnotes of the 1879 edition are Mormon 229, where the land northward is North America and the land southward is South America. So this hemispheric model that people have started coming up with to try and get more archaeological hits, to say oh, well, there were concrete buildings because we found some in a place where until the early 1900s, the Book of Mormon just wasn't placed at all. The narrow neck of land was never, Panama. The narrow neck of land was somewhere in North America between a couple of big lakes, until we realized that you needed to try and expand, or the church realized they needed to try and expand the places in which they could get archaeological hits to try and bolster the historicity of the Book of Mormon in some way. Because the place they were looking, particularly the hill Cumorah, is a clean hill. We'll get to that. That's also discussed.
Yeah.
So am I reading this correctly, Julia, Nemo, that basically Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators in the 19th century basically said when they say hill Cumorah is in Joseph Smith's hill Cumorah in upstate New York, that's what we mean. That's what the Book of Mormon means when it says hill Cumorah. That when it talks about the waters of Ripley Ancam, they mean Lake Ontario. That's what the Book of Mormon text itself said, as approved by 19th century Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators. And that also that when they talked about the land northward in the Book of Mormon, they meant North America, and southward was South America. The prophets, seers, and revelators approved these interpretations of the lands and geographical features in the Book of Mormon. Is that right?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, Sorry, I was probably eating. Men who speak for God did indeed say that. Yes.
Okay.
Or did
All
indeed.
right.
Yeah, and
Well,
I-
that's
And I will add, like in the Journal of Discourses, you have Parley P. Pratt, you have Orson Pratt. I think there's a bunch of other people, even the prophets, Brigham Young and everybody. They even specifically point to very specific locations like these footnotes. So so these are prophets who speak to God, and they're saying that of where the specific locations that the Book of Mormon took place, and then those have changed because they don't hold up.
Yeah. Not just to be pedantic, not just to God, Julia, for God.
Yes.
Like, there's a big, big claim.
Okay. Wait, I wanted to add too. So Nemo, when we were talking about these slides, you said you wanted to add these parts in here, even though this topic is anachronisms. Can you help me link again why bring these footnotes in for the topic of anachronisms?
Because it's the way in which they've had to try and expand the place in which this occurred to try and get hits.
Oh, like
for
the cement or the
anachronisms, right?
sheep
Yeah,
or the
cement or
takers.
the sheep and the whatever. They're like, right, now we've got alpacas or whatever, that we can now look at whether they were domesticated, or that might not be a good example off the top of my head, but like tapirs as something that could be a replace for horses. Tapirs didn't exist in North America at all, so you've got to go to South America to find them anyway. So even though they're a really bad apologetic, the only way you can even start to try and fix that anachronism is to expand the geography of the Book of Mormon, which is what these footnotes show us.
Yeah.
Can I just also note that the biggest anachronism in the Book of Mormon is Christianity and the King James Bible. Like, why in the world, as we've already noted, centuries before Jesus was even born and his name was even known to Jews, are they quoting Jesus, talking about Mary, talking about Jesus's birth, his baptism? And why are there literally 19th century Protestant sermons being spoken out of the mouths of Book of Mormon prophets before Jesus was even born? Jews didn't have that. The Jews in the Holy Land didn't have Jesus's name. They didn't have Jesus's baptism, confirmation. They didn't have Protestant sermons in the Holy Land prior to Jesus's birth. So that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah. And I'll add too, and I don't have the specific sources, but I can get those. But I'm pretty sure a change that was made during Joseph Smith's lifetime was, I think, in the Book of Jacob, where they say Christ's name. And then I think he realizes that, that can't be correct. So he changes it, I think, to the Messiah or something, some other thing that's not his name, which also, again, the Book of Mormon translation was an exact text, that the text didn't change didn't change until it was written down correctly. So things like that don't make sense. So like you said, Christianity was existing way before it should have. And the name was known.
There's a whole episode, people, that's worth looking at where we discuss it with Mike, the fact that they at one point they know exactly when Christ is going to be born, and then all of a sudden they just don't anymore.
Right.
Because of the way the Book of Mormon was written, starting at Mosiah and moving through and then coming back around at the beginning because of the lost pages.
Yeah.
Also, tell me if I'm wrong, and again, we're repeating things we've mentioned on Mormon Stories before. The idea of books in and of itself is anachronistic, because 600 BC, books didn't exist. There were no such thing as books. There were no such thing as bindings, and there were no such thing as plates that were assembled into books and then into a larger book, and then, compiled with rings, holes in the plates and rings binding the plates. That's a technology that didn't exist until the printing press. It was scrolls. So just this idea of book, the golden plates compiled into a book, the Book of Mormon itself, as a technology, books didn't exist 600 BC. Am I wrong?
No, and your interview with David Bokovoy, I think you ask him those specific questions and he answers you. He's a Bible scholar historian. So to know more about that, I would recommend going to see his. I think you guys re-release them, right? So those should be pretty recent, but I'll put those in the show notes too.
At best, there were scrolls, and even the scrolls weren't compiled into books. It was just a scroll and a scroll, and then a bunch of scrolls in a thing. But the fact that it's called the Book of Mormon, and then it was compiled into plates as if there were different books within the larger book, all anachronistic.
Also, thought that just came to me, the holy text of Judaism, the Torah, is still a scroll today, traditionally, right? The Torah will be written out that, these decorative versions that you'll read from at bar mitzvahs and such are big scrolls. if these are ancient Jews, why did they not bring that tradition of keeping their holy writings on scrolls with them? Why have they why were there brass plates that they had to go get from Laban in Jerusalem when all of these holy texts in Jerusalem at that time would have been on scrolls?
And again, there were no brass plates. There were no brass plates 600 BC. The Bible wasn't read or consumed or shared that way 600 BC. And then we're not even mentioning, of course, Deutero-Isaiah, which is parts of Isaiah that were written after Lehi and his family would have left Jerusalem, that somehow magically appear in the Book of Mormon. That's also anachronistic. And we've got LDS discussion episodes that cover Deutero-Isaiah as well. So there's just a gazillion anachronisms in the Book of Don't What's the next slide, Julia?
Okay, so this is a one of the videos released by Scripture Central, and this is Jasmine. Don't know her last name. Rappley.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I apologize to her. I don't know how to say it. So the title of this clip that I've titled it is "How Apologists Handle Anachronisms." So I want to just play the clip, and then I want to talk about what things she does as a workaround for making this okay. The topic is specifically horses.
All right. So bad apologetics incoming.
For a long time, critics of the Book of Mormon have pointed out that a major flaw is how the Book of Mormon mentions horses, even though horses were extinct in Book of Mormon times and didn't get reintroduced into the Americas until Columbus. Well, some brand new research published this week in the Texas Journal of Science challenges that assumption because a team of researchers in Mexico discovered horse bones that date to Book of Mormon times. These horse remains were excavated from a site near Cedral, San Luis Potosí in Mexico. And to figure out when these horse bones dated to, the researchers obtained radiocarbon dates at each archaeological layer or strata from charcoal and other organic material close to the horse. And now you've got to see just how perfectly these dates line up with the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon mentions horses only a handful of times, and we have radiocarbon dates that may attest to horses in all of these periods. Two of the radiocarbon dates found near the horse remains came from the mid-2nd millennium BC, which is about when the Jaredites mention horses in Ether chapter 9. Another dates to the 6th or 5th century BC, which is close to Nephi's arrival in the Promised Land when he mentions horses, and also to Enos's when he mentions many horses. The final mention of horses in the Book of Mormon comes from the Gadianton siege during the 1st century AD in 3rd Nephi, and two radiocarbon dates supports the presence of horses during this period as well. Now, the type of horse they found is also important because it shows that these bones wouldn't have been Spanish horses that somehow got inserted into earlier archaeological layers. All horse samples that were found after the Ice Age but before Columbus in the site belong to North American horse species that are now extinct, Equus mexicanus and Equus conversidens. The horses the Spanish brought over are the Equus caballos. Evidence is always tentative, but this possibly pushes the extinction of the North American horse way later than many scientists have assumed. And this is consistent with a growing body of evidence that suggests that at least some pockets of horses may have survived for several millennia after the last Ice Age, which parallels well with what we see in the Book of Mormon. To learn more, check out the newest article published by Book of Mormon Central, No I-649, and follow along for more Book of Mormon evidence.
Wow, slam dunk.
Can I immediately take exception to the way that she uses the word assumed? The way that later than many scientists assumed. No, later than many scientists posited or theorized or based off the evidence put forward, right? Then second point, just real quick, that happened in Mexico, so who cares? Because that's not where the Book of Mormon took place, according to Joseph Smith and all his contemporaries, and according to all the leaders of the church before the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So who cares? You can find horse bones in Mexico all day long, all you want, because again, unless we allow the church to widen the goalpost by changing the geography of where the Book of Mormon happened, if we're going to believe Joseph Smith and all his contemporaries, then horse bones in Mexico don't do anything for the historicity of the Book of Mormon anyway.
True. So John, if you put up the slide, I kind of highlight some of the words that I found problematic. So she claims a team of researchers in Mexico discovered horse bones that date to Book of Mormon times. And also, when I was looking this up, I read the abstract of the paper that she talks about, and I'm not an archaeologist or a geologist. It doesn't really make sense to me. And she was listing, she had that picture of the different layers of the soil and things like that. But when I look these up, the people who do most of these anachronistic research for the Book of Mormon are Mormon. And so to me, that's automatically, you have this one individual, I can't remember his name, but he says that he starts with the conclusion that the Book of Mormon is true or the Book of Abraham, and he moves from there. And so I find it problematic if you're basing your research on just Mormon scholars, because they sometimes will go into it with a preconceived idea that the Book of Mormon is true. So I already don't like that.
I believe that's Kerry Muhlestein who said that.
Okay, yes, I remember starting with an M. I just couldn't remember
Yeah, I
who
think
it was.
Kerry Milstein.
Which is and very interesting. So anyways, so she also goes on to say, she says, and to figure out when the horse bones dated to the researchers obtained radiocarbon dates at each archaeological layer or strata from charcoal and other organic material close to the horse bones. So I just thought, I don't know how all this works because I'm a studying historian. I'm not studying to be an archaeologist or geologist, but they're taking these examples from this study from the material close to the horse bones, not the horse bones itself. I don't know why they couldn't do that. I don't know enough about this, but I just thought that was good to point out. And then she goes on to say, 2 of the radiocarbon dates found near the horse remains came from the mid-2nd millennium BC. So again, it's near the horse remains. It's not the horse remains itself. Evidence, and she says, evidence is always tentative, but this possibly pushes the extinction of the North American horse way later than many scientists have assumed. And then you said you found problems with the word assumed, but then she's using words like tentatively, possibly. Whenever I see her videos and I look in her comments, there's a lot of people that are pointing out her seemingly overuse of the words possibly or tentative or things that kind of like
she hedges a lot.
Yeah, like they kneecap her argument. Anyway, so I just wanted to point this out because this is how a lot of apologists handle these anachronisms. They like kind of fudge around it or like, oh, it's possible that this is like there's possible that this is cement or that this is just they use different language.
It's possible that I can fly. But I can't. And I've got no evidence to say I can.
Yeah. The only last thing I'll just add is she's quoting some obscure Texas journal of something or other and citing some obscure random journal article in no way overturns the consensus of, the scientific consensus of an entire body that spans multiple decades, if not half a century. It is generally known that there probably were horses prior to like 10,000 BC, and that after the Ice Age, horses did not exist in North, Central, or South America. And it wasn't until the Spanish came and reintroduced horses that then Native Americans were able to get their hands on horses. And then, of course, by the time Joseph Smith comes around, Native Americans are riding horses. So, of course, he would have had Lamanites and Nephites riding horses in the Book of Mormon because he wouldn't have really known or realized that they didn't have access to them during the time of the Book of Mormon. But just because Jasmine can sample one probably low impact factor less credible article that is trying to sort of half-heartedly prove the possibility of something, that does not overturn sort of decades, if not half a century of scientific consensus around this point.
No.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter anyway, because it happened in Mexico. I do really think it's that simple. Joseph Smith made specific claims about where it all happened. So horse bones in Mexico aren't going to help with that.
You're saying horse bones in Mexico don't give North American Native Americans horses.
Exactly.
During the time of, the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
All right.
America's big. America's big is what I learned as a little Brit coming to America earlier this year. Big old place.
Yeah.
It is. All right, Julia. So this is the first half of the CES letter, addresses the Book of Mormon. I would say we've covered 5 points so far, and Jeremy is a solid 5-0. Is that fair, Nemo and Julia? Would you say that it's 5-0 CES letter versus critics?
I would is even the things that they can, even some of the anachronisms that maybe they can answer for. That doesn't just because you can answer for one doesn't mean you can answer for the rest of the 20 of them or however many there are. And like you said, Nemo, some of these, and again, we're kind of the conversation of anachronisms will carry over into the second part, with the next question about archaeology, and there's no evidence for it. So these will carry on, and so even some of the things they can answer for it, they can only answer for it in Mexico, or they can only answer for it in North America. They can't. It doesn't work with all of it together. So there's still problems in it. So to me, it doesn't look like FAIR Mormon or these apologists have any good responses to Jeremy Runnells.
And there is a possibility, that Joseph Smith got something right by accident, right? He may have talked about, concrete buildings, and then they find concrete buildings, and he's like, okay, That doesn't mean he's right about all the other anachronisms. But what it does for members of the church is it gives them a reason to then go, oh, well, then if we found something for that, maybe given enough time, we will find things for other things as well. And that's difficult when it's faced with the scientific conclusion currently, or the scientific position currently, that horses were not in North America pre-Christopher Columbus.
Right.
And I'll just add, it only takes one anachronism to prove something is invalid. If you had a perfectly authentic, photo of Abraham Lincoln that got his hair right and his nose right and his clothes right and his horse right and the building behind him right, but he's holding, an iPod, it only takes one anachronism to show an entire, historical artifact as being inauthentic. And so again, you don't need any more than one anachronism to show that the Book of Mormon isn't a historical document.
Yeah, like AI can produce a very convincing image, right? AI imagery is a big thing at the moment, but all it takes is for everyone in the image to have polydactyly and all have 6 fingers, and you go, okay, maybe that's not an authentic picture after all, right? That's all it takes.
Yeah.
All right. Any final points we want to make today before we sign off, and then invite people to join us next time for the second half? Julia?
I don't think so. Like just again, this binary of the Book of Mormon is it's either all true or it's not, and this rest of it is a fraud or a sham, or however he worded it. Like that's this binary.
So we didn't just find one fatal problem to the Book of Mormon. We found 5, and we've got 6 more to go. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for Jeremy's research, yeah.
Yeah.
If you take seriously those claims of people like Jeffrey R. Holland and
Ezra Benson,
and to an extent Gordon B. Hinckley, where he talks about, it's either the greatest work on the heavens or it's a fraud, right?
Yeah.
These binaries, if you take them seriously, I think this work by Jeremy kind of only points one way at the moment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Julia, thanks for your research, and Nemo, thanks for your help and for both of your commentary. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I really like some of the stuff that he presents in the next few questions. So.
All right. Y'all check out Nemo the Mormon YouTube channel. Nemo's doing great work. Support Nemo, and check out Analyzing Mormonism, TikTok and Instagram, because Julia, you do great work as well.
Thanks.
All right. And thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories Podcast, LDS Discussions Edition. Remember, the LDS Discussions series is best consumed sequentially. So start with episode 1, and everything we do after that will make a lot more sense. Plus, it's a really great way to look at the evidence, that attaches to or addresses Mormon Church truth claims. And we try to be as dispassionate and as objective as we possibly can, although we do fail to be perfectly objective and dispassionate at times. You can view the entire LDS discussion series either on Spotify, because Spotify allows for video. So just go to the Mormon Stories feed or the LDS Discussions feed, and all the videos there. You can check out the YouTube playlist for LDS Discussions, and the whole series is there. It's also integrated into the Mormon Stories Podcast YouTube stream, or you can listen to all this on Apple Podcast or on Spotify Audio or wherever you get your episodes. Please, always thanks to Mike of LDS Discussions for his great work. LDSDiscussions.com website is still available as well. And just know that we're going to be doing more episodes in the coming weeks and months to keep the LDS Discussions project alive, and to continue addressing these issues, so that you, our viewers and listeners, can decide for yourself, based on the evidence, what to make of the Mormon Church's truth claims. The final thing I'll say is thank you, Jeremy Runnells, for the CES letter. If you don't want to watch 100+ hours of LDS discussions, all you have to do is download the CES letter at cesletter.org. It's a PDF. It's like 70, 80 pages long. And in one day, many people are able to determine for themselves whether or not the Mormon Church's truth claims stand up to scrutiny. So love you, Jeremy. Check out the CES letter at cesletter.org. Download it, buy it. You can buy a copy of it. You could, even if you buy a copy of it, Jeremy may even sign that copy when he ships them out. As I understand it, he still ships out copies of the CES letter book by hand. I could be mistaken about that, but I believe he does. I'm in touch with Jeremy. He's a great guy. Check out CES letter. Find out for yourself if Jeremy is sincere and if it's valid. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories Podcast. We could only do this episodes with your donations. So please, thank you if you're a donor to Mormon Stories Podcast. We couldn't do it without you. If you're not a donor and you want to see LDS Discussion Series continue, just go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor, and we'll continue this series. We do pay Julia, we do pay Nemo. So we require your donations to be able to keep this alive. We pay me as well. So become a monthly donor if you're not. And then even if you don't donate, or if you do, subscribing to this channel, liking this episode, sharing it, commenting on it, giving us a positive review at either Spotify or at Apple Podcasts, or wherever this podcast is found. Positive reviews always are super helpful as well. So thanks for joining us today. Be good to each other, be kind to each other, and we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys soon.